Hello, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you are. We will start today's presentation. Today, the presentation is kind of split up into two main components. The first part is where I'm going to be discussing Maximo Work Centers. Maximo Work Centers are a new add-on that's been added to the existing Maximo suite of products that is provided primarily at no additional cost with a modern UI. Part two is going to branch into this a little further with an actual add-on. So this is not included with base Maximo. This is a new Maximo add-on called Maximo Asset Health Insights, which basically allows you to take a more predictive maintenance slant on Maximo. So whereas Maximo is traditionally and of course very strong in reactive preventative maintenance and in some capacity in condition-based maintenance, but this really allows you to start transforming your organization or your maintenance strategy into a more predictive strategy. It also heavily leverages the Internet of Things and Watson IoT, which is also part of this presentation. So we'll be going into what is that and what is Watson IoT compared to the Internet of Things, and how does that relate to Asset Health Insights. As I'm sure you can understand, is that in order to do more predictive maintenance, you need to be discussing and talking about or bringing real-time data into Maximo, and I'm going to specifically focus on a process data storing called OSI Pi, which I know is specifically in our customer base and predominantly, in the process control industry, they are a widely used system. So there's a lot of interest, and we get a lot of questions around how would we be able to pull that data into Maximo and leverage that as part of Maximo Health Insights. So two parts of this webcast, also two parts of the demonstration I'll be doing at the end of that. There will be a live demo as part of this presentation. And, of course, at the end of that, we'll open up the floor to some questions and answers. As I mentioned, there's two parts to the presentation. Part one, I only really have a few slides about this because probably the easiest way to talk about Maximo Work Centers is to actually show them, talk about what they do, rather than have a lot of slide material around that. But as an introduction, Maximo Work Centers were added to Maximo 7605. So you need to be in 7.6 for this, and as of 7605, that fixed pack level, no, feature pack level rather, they were added to Maximo. They are included in Maximo. So the work centers I'm going to be discussing here is there's no additional license required. They are part of your Maximo application. The other thing that's interesting is that even though it was introduced in 7605, there were additions made in later versions in 7606 that add more capability. So the IBM plans with the work centers are to have an incremental release cycle, and as feature pack comes out, there'll be more work centers that are delivered as part of that. They are actually a separate application, so a separate deployment rather. So you can access the work centers through a collectively called the Maximo X launch point. So whereas normally you would log into Maximo, your production server name /Maximo, you now go into production name /Maximo X. The big difference here is that this is a modern, as they call it, responsive web design UI. So it is. It looks very, very different than kind of the classic Maximo, and more specifically, it is built to run. Although it requires a connection into all these form factors, but it runs on desktops, on your laptops, on tablets, smartphones, and it readjusts, the size readjusts based on the form factor that you're in. It is basically KPI driven. It also has built-in integration with Watson Analytics specifically. And this, again, I will try to demonstrate that as part of my demo as well. The work centers take a very role-based approach. So on the next slide, I have a listing of all the roles, but it's essentially as you log into the work center, you assume a particular role as part of the organization, and the information you see in front of you is tailored for those needs. So the first work center that we'll be showing here is the technician work center. There's a supervisor work center. There's a business analyst work center, and these were all released as part of 7605. And as of 7606, there's a data set designer and a self-service or a self-requester work center. Again, as of that part, as far as my slide presentation, I'm not going to drill too much into that. When we get to the demonstration portion of the webcast today, I will be demonstrating each of these role-based work centers individually. The second part of the webcast today talks specifically about Maximo Asset Health Insights. So why do we have Maximo Health Insights? And really what this is about is the idea or the observation, and I'm sure the realization within most organizations that as you progress along the maturity on maintenance strategy, you probably went from, reactive maintenance, breakdown or break-fix type maintenance to preventative maintenance. And with preventative maintenance, we typically find that a lot of organizations, they basically have more PMs coming out than they have staff to actually execute. So what that in turn turns into is that you need to optimize and prioritize these PMs, and that's becoming a necessity. And also what the consequence of that is that the effort and cost tied to doing all this preventative maintenance is not related to the actual health of the asset. So what that turns into is that a time-based approach is consuming resources on assets that potentially not even need that. Now, the stats I have on this slide, I actually have to thank IBM for this. These are their numbers based on their analytics. But I think they speak for themselves, is that 40% of preventative maintenance costs is spent on assets with negligible effect on uptime. So that really is a tough number, because you're spending time, materials, effort, perhaps even third-party costs on assets that don't need it. 30% of preventive maintenance activities are carried out too frequently, and this is primarily because you want to set your PM frequency on the lowest common denominator, and that probably means you're revisiting or doing PMs on assets that don't quite need it because they're perfectly healthy. And the other one is that 45% of all maintenance efforts are ineffective. In other words, they're done that with no measurable effect on your asset health. And I'm sure that's not news to most of you out there. And again, this is probably not news to most of you out there as well. Is where we want to go is to be able to monitor and analyze asset health data, both from an historical and real-time perspective, then use that to intervene at the right time before assets go down. And, of course, that allows us to prioritize and optimize resources. And the results of that kind of speak for themselves. Again, these numbers are provided to me by IBM's analysts. So, the results speak for themselves. You can, by doing this, you can reduce maintenance costs by up to 25%. You can cut unplanned outages by 50% by using real-time data. You can eliminate up to 70% of breakdowns, reduce scheduled repairs by up to 12%, and reduce capital investment by 3 to 5%. So that is obviously, a huge business driver to be able to explore the shift from more preventative-based and add predictive into that mix. The question is, of course, how do we do that? So Maximo Asset Health Insights is an add-on or a Maximo add-on that was added to Maximo, released fairly recently, which is designed with reliability engineers and asset owners in mind. And it allows you to subscribe to warnings and notifications to take action prior to failure by using real-time data or condition-based data on the asset. And it allows you to quantify your current asset health across the fleet using data from many different sources, So the sources of quantifying asset health could be Maximo itself, the remaining useful life. It could be the maintenance and failure history. That could be a driver towards quantification of asset health. But it can also be real-time data or sensor data that's being measured for that asset. And Maximo Asset Health Insights allows you to combine and mix or define those differently by different asset classes and so on. It also allows you to leverage historical weather data as a key element in determining asset health. This may be, in colder or, extreme cold or extreme hot climates, or if you have assets that, are affected by weather, whether these are, cooling units in hot areas, and so on and so forth, you can actually take into account the accurate weather data as part of your asset health, and Asset Health Insights allow you to combine that into your asset metrics. You can minimize unnecessary maintenance based on this calculated asset health score. So as the system is calculating these asset health, you can use that to drive preventative maintenance instead of just having time-based maintenance. And of course, it provides you insights into determining repair versus replace, because once you've quantified asset health, you can decide whether or not it makes sense to either replace the asset or repair the asset. And then the graph on the right explains kind of how all these things fit together. So if we look at all the way at the bottom of the graph, that's where that's where the exciting part comes into play. So this is where you can start utilizing SCADA data, any type of other field device that is a sensor, like anything that emits data that's at the plant level that may or may not be captured by SCADA. The weather data and so on, all that data gets put into the Watson IoT platform. What that is, they'll explain to you in a minute here on the next slide. Once that data is being collected, this is a cloud-based solution, by the way. Once that data is being collected, you can apply filtering and rules on that data. And these rules and filters can be applied either on the Maximo side specifically or prior to sending that data to Maximo. You can then, with Asset Health Insights, define a scoring methodology. By asset class, you can define what is the quantifiable asset useful life, or you can quantify the asset health metrics based on maintenance history, based on, for example, run hours, anything that can be captured through these field devices. And, of course, there's also a way to manually intervene there and just set a manual health score on that. Then the normalization of health score, which is very important. So across the fleet of assets, you want to have some kind of, you want to be able to independently assess health, the quantifiable health, so you can compare two assets of the same class, and you can say one is 20% and the other one is 80% healthy. And, of course, the business outcomes of that, once you put all that into place, are the ones that we were after, is the reduction of downtime or the avoidance of downtime, the reduction of unnecessary maintenance, and, of course, an improved asset strategy that falls out of that. So let's talk a little bit more about the sensor data, and the IoT, the Internet of Things, and the IoT platform. So predominantly, there's three main sources of sensor data. So there's real-time data from low-cost add-on sensors, and there's especially in the last 4 or 5 years, there's been a huge improvement on being able to capture sensor data out in the field. Of course, not forgetting also that you may today more than likely have already captured and storing a huge amount of sensor data from your plant equipment. This is typically done as part of your process control implementation strategy, and your company has more than likely already invested significantly into this area. Kind of a rule of thumb, if you're building a new plant, that usually 10% of that budget is allocated to the process control infrastructure, which includes typically a process data historian that is already capturing things like temperatures, pressures, valve positions, potentially vibration, any type of data that is required to operate the plant or control the plant is useful for obviously maintaining the plant. We talked about weather data as well here. All that data has been brought into, as I mentioned, into the Watson IoT platform. So what is Watson IoT? Watson IoT is a cloud-based aggregator for collecting all that sensor data. Allows you to contextualize, allows you to monitor this data, it allows you to filter it, and it allows you to store it. So once it's collected in the IoT platform, you can bring it into Maximo Asset Health Insights, which again, as I discussed on the previous slide, allows you to put visibility into asset conditions. It allows you to consolidate all this data, so you could have a low-cost sensor that is not being tracked by your process data historian, and you can combine that data with the data collected off the OSI Pi process data historian, and you can bring that into one concept of a sensor that relates to that asset, and then build rules and filters on that before you bring that into Maximo. And then the Asset Health Insights application itself in Maximo allows you to automatically or on demand take action based on the data collected there. So as I mentioned before, a lot of this stuff is probably better shown than talked about. So one of the things I'm going to be doing here is on both parts of the webcast today, the work centers and Asset Health Insights, I'm going to have a demonstration about both of these. So we're going to loop back to part one again on the Maximo work centers, and that's the first part I'm going to demonstrate to you. So the first thing you notice if I go back to my login screen here is that the Maximo work centers are shown in you log into a separate link or a separate application that looks very different than your standard Maximo login screen. So the first work center I'm going to be demonstrating to you is the work center of a supervisor. So I'm going to log in as somebody who has access to the supervisor work center, which incidentally is controlled through normal Maximo security groups as you're used to doing that today. So I'll be logging in as Ed, who is a supervisor. So as this is loading, you'll see that the screen is kind of split up into two main sections. There's the top half of the section which shows you a listing of KPIs, and these KPIs are specifically tailored towards the supervisor role. And the way the role is broken out is the supervisor role is constructed as a person who manages a team of people that execute work. So generally speaking, he has a team of resources allocated to them as being their supervisor, and his or her job on a day-to-day basis is managing assignments, who gets to work on what for how long, reassign those, and monitor the work that's being done, and at the tail end of that is to close the work. So, part of key metrics for the supervisor is, how much emergency work is overdue. Emergency work comes into play, and you see that's at the top of the screen here. And as you see, if I can click on that, it will actually drop down into a historical trend, and I can see that going right to left, as more recent to further in the past, that trend is actually going up, which may be, a normal course of business on a Thursday, or it could be a bad trend, that needs to be looked at. I can see how many overdue PM work do I have. I currently have 4 PMs that are overdue, but, the trend is downward, so maybe that's a good thing. And I can see my PM performance, again, looking at a long-term graph here, is my PM performance is hovering about 70% and it's on the increase, which means we're completing PMs, more than we did a couple of days ago. On the bottom half of the screen is a list of work orders, and you see there's 4 buckets. For those of you familiar with more like a Kanban, a Japanese Kanban type scenario, is each of these cards that are showing on the screen is a work order. That work order, as it goes through its life cycle of being planned or unplanned, monitored, and closed, moves from left to right. So, for example, if I were to look at an unassigned work order here that is the 17.4 is the fan breaker tripped and shut down, I can go in and look and see I want to assign some labor to this work order. So I can click on the work order, pick my dates of assignment, and I can say I want to assign a person for 4 hours, and let's say off the people I supervise, I'm going to pick Sam and assign that person to it. Hold on, I need to refresh this first, make sure I have actual availability. And I'm going to assign Sam to this work order. And Maximo notifies that that work has been assigned. It gets removed from my assign unplanned work. It gets put into my monitor work bucket. At the same time, if I want to reassign work, so for example, if I want to look at this work order here, see it's currently assigned, and then maybe assign that to a different person. In this case is an electrician. On the monitor work side, Maximo is showing me some important information regarding these work orders. So I can see, without having to log into the classic Maximo, I can see where we are. I can see we have costs, breakdowns to completion, to estimation. I can see where we are on our tasks. I can see if we've used any materials on this work order, and I can see that if there's any comments associated with this work order. From there, I can also go ahead and close work orders if I wanted to. So if I look at the closed work orders, again, I see some information regarding this work order here. If I wanted to close this work order, I can click on the button, and that would close this work order, take it off my screen, and essentially my day continues by monitoring planned work, unplanned work, and assignments. So without using the classic Maximo interface, I'm manipulating work orders, I'm assigning people to those work orders, and I can even close work orders if you allow your supervisor to do that. And of course, what happens in the background here is that the Maximo records gets adjusted accordingly, but it all gets done from this new modern supervisor work center. The next work center I want to demonstrate to you is the work center of a technician. So I'm going to sign out as the supervisor, and I can sign in as the technician. And the technician work center looks very different because the role of a technician is very different from a supervisor. So the technician work center is really focused on having a very basic view of the work that I, as the logged in user, am assigned to. So I can see that I have currently 2 open assignments. I have an overdue work order, which is an emergency work order. And I can see that I'm assigned, and it was scheduled to start last week. It hasn't been started, I guess. I can also look at and click on this, which will then show me the attributes of this Maximo work order. So I can see if there's any tasks associated with it. I can see if there's any planned materials for this work order, any planned tools, or any planned labor. If I look at the work order I just assigned a minute ago as a supervisor, I can now see that, yes, I'm assigned to this fan breaker trip issue. And again, I can pull in more information, but I can also directly from this work center, I can essentially start this assignment. So I can take this assignment on, which in essence would, as you can see, it's now changed the status of this work order in progress. I can stop my assignment, which will stop the clock essentially running from my time assignment to this work order. Or if I'm finished with this work order, I can complete it, and that will complete my assignment. If I'm the only one assigned to that work order, it will also complete the work order itself and remove that from my today's assignment. Okay. I've also set up Sam, in this particular case. He has 2 roles. He's the technician role work center, but he also has the self-service work center, which is the other work center I want to demonstrate real quick here. And the self-service work center is focused around basically almost like a kiosk method of walking up to a screen and with very basic UI components being able to create a service request. So this, if depending on your current license model on Maximo, in most cases you are allowed to have unlimited users just creating service requests. You could actually expose this, out to, like I said, a kiosk type situation where anybody can walk up to this, log in, and then create a service request. So I'm going to do this right now. I'm going to go into this work center. I see I have no active service requests that I created in the past. I can go and click New. I can pick from one of these service request templates. So, and this is all configurable from inside Maximo. So you can have, maybe plant equipment template, or you can have, in this particular case, is more facility-based on restrooms, on offices, heating and air, and so on. Or I can just create any issue. So I'm just going to click a new issue here. And let's say this, I'm an operator. I walked down, I did a rounds, and I found an issue. So let's say I found a noisy fan. I click Next. It's going to ask me if I would like to add a photo or video of the issue. I'm just going to say no in this particular case. I'm going to navigate to, basically this is a location hierarchy navigation. So I'm going to say it was at the Needham site in the boiler room under the HVAC system. And I'm going to say circulation fan 1. I'm going to set this location. I'm not going to set an asset number. I didn't know what that was. I am choosing not to make it a high priority. I'm going to submit this request. And you can see that now this active request shows up on my work center. If I click on it, I can add further comments to it as well. I can say found during operator rounds today. And you can see this shows up as on the Maximo side as a work log comment. In here, it kind of shows up almost like a chat window, if you're familiar with that, during the as part of the work center here. Okay, so that's the work center. Now what I want to do is kind of switch gears and go into showing Maximo Asset Health Insights. So what I'm going to be doing is logging in as somebody who has access to the Asset Health Insights work center. So the UI of the Asset Health Insight is delivered as one of these work centers. So I'm going to log in as Marcia, who has through regular Maximo security, has access to Maximo's Asset Health Insights. So as part of that, I'm going to log into this new work center, and you can see at the top of the screen this says Reliability Engineering. And again, just to stress, this is an add-on to Maximo. You will not have this as part of 7606 today, but you get it as bundled with Maximo Asset Health Insights. And you see at the top of the screen, it allows you to build something called a card. So I'm looking at, as a reliability engineer, you can decide to split up your fleet of assets into different components. In this particular case, I created a single card. You can have many cards at the top of the screen here that is looking at specific assets driven by a saved query. We're working on reducing some of the noise in the line, folks. There's a saved query. In this particular case, I have a saved query defined in Maximo, which is a potable water pump. Oops, let me go back in there. I can set the page size, how many cards I'm showing, and I can also show some attributes as part of this, the cards that are being shown here. So this allows me to break down perhaps a large fleet of assets into manageable components, different cards at the top of the screen. And then what this will show you at the on the left-hand side is a listing of all these assets that meet that criteria, ordered by decreasing asset health. So as you can see in here is I have a listing of 15 pumps. I have my first pump here is 45% asset health, and then in the breakdown on the right, you can see the quantities, how they break down. So I have 1 sitting at poor health, 3 at fair, and then 11 at good health. Now, what does that really mean in terms of good health or not good health? So I'm just going to look at one of these assets here, 07, and wait for my screen to refresh here. So you can see that my total asset health metric is broken into 2 different drivers. So I created 2 drivers that drive asset health. My first one is age. So the older the asset is, the more it will drag down on the asset health. And the other one is a real-time metric. So I took a temperature. So consider this to be, for example, a bearing temperature on this pump. And then high temperature means bad, and low temperature means good. So the higher the temperature is, the lower the driver that would drive down the asset health metric. So I can see that I have about, and I've split it into a 50-50 influence of each of these. So I'll just quickly show you the scoring system that you can configure on this. So as you can see, I have one asset scoring metric with 2 drivers. And if I just click on the configuration icon here, just ignore all the details. There's probably not enough time to go through here, but the important part is that out of my second driver, so my temperature driver, I'm using a temperature meter that is sitting on the asset. So as the temperature readings are coming in, the asset health gets updated, and as the asset health gets updated, this whole entire screen gets updated, which allows you to break down the real-time asset health of that asset. And it also, Maximo keeps track of the historical health of that asset. So you can see trends, and you can act on trends instead. So the other thing that this drives is notifications. So I'll cancel out of here and go back into, and you see there's a little alarm bell on the top right of this AH007 asset. If I click on that, it will pull in historical notification. So I can see that on a couple of weeks ago, on the 2nd and the 6th, there were 2 notifications or alarms raised around poor health. And how you act on this, of course, is really dependent on your situation. But you can see that I have a set of possible notifications. I have one tied to vibration, one tied to poor health, and I've signed up to get subscribed when the poor health drops below a specific threshold. So that in and of itself allows you to basically go from more reactive to preventative maintenance. The other thing that, as part of the Asset Health Insights, allows you to do is I'll go back into open up this asset here. Is, as I mentioned, we're using real-time data, the temperature data, to drive the asset health. And if I can click on the meter reading here, and I'll just reduce my time frame today. As you can see, that as data gets collected from the real-time sensors, it gets sent to this asset meter, and there's a task running on the Maximo side that will calculate and take these values into account for calculating asset health. And this is where I think the exciting part comes in, is now where is this information coming from? Well, this information is actually coming from my OSI Pi system that I have set up. So this is an instrumented asset. I have both the vibration and the temperature are instrumented on my Pi system. So what I can show you real quick here is I actually have a live, this is a demo system of course, but a live OSI Pi system out here, and you can see that the current reading of this temperature is 53, and I want to pull that information into Maximo to calculate the asset health. And of course, this is where the Internet of Things and Watson IoT come into play. So I'll take the reading from Pi, and I want to push that into Maximo. How do I go about that? Well, what you will need is Watson IoT. So I'll flip to this other screen here, which shows me, let me do this one, that shows me the IoT Watson platform that I have configured for this demo. So you can see that I've set up in my Watson IoT platform, I've created a device, and that device maps to my OSI Pi configuration. On that device, if I go to my, there's a screen here where I should be able to, there we go. On this device, you can see this device has two attributes. One on the bottom right there says temperature, the other one says vibration. And of course, you can have thousands or tens of thousands of these assets defined on the IoT platform. And I've used the IoT platform's capability to read data, and I'll quickly show this. I won't go through a lot of detail here, but this comes part of the IoT, the Watson IoT platform. I'm using this to collect data from my OSI Pi system here in this block, transform it to a IoT Watson sensor, and then in this one, publish it to my Watson IoT sensor itself. And this is running on a schedule basis. You can run this on a time schedule. You can run this on an event schedule that as data exceeds thresholds, then you want to wait for that to come back to Watson IoT. But the interesting thing is that right now, I think every 15 minutes, we're collecting that information, pushing that into these devices. And then on the Maximo side, flip back to my Maximo screen here. I'll show you real quick. On the right-hand side, you see it as an associated devices. And you can see that I've mapped the vibration and temperature of the IoT Watson device and the ID, so the pump 201, and I've mapped that to these two meters that I've set up in Maximo. One is a vibration meter and one is a temperature meter. And once I've accomplished that, that allows me now to open up this trend, click on meter reading. I'll switch it back to a day view here, see more detail. And you can see that the blue lines are coming in from the sensor, so that's my Watson IoT data that's being pulled in on demand. And I've also, as part of Maximo Asset Health Insights, you get a new capability to read that periodically and store that as actual Maximo meter readings, which are the green dots here. The last thing I quickly, in the interest of time, wanted to show you also is event management. So what if you want to, do things based on the real-time data conditions? So if I flip back to my Watson IoT screen here, in here, this allows me to set up rules. So the rule I've set up here is, and again, you can choose to do this on the IoT platform or on the Maximo side, depending on your configuration, or even on the OSI Pi side, of course. But in this particular example, I've stood up a new Watson IoT platform rule that looks at the vibration. And I can combine this. I can say if vibration and temperature are over a threshold, and I can say do this only the first time it exceeds this limit, and then don't alarm after that and wait for it to come back down to normal. There's a lot of capabilities there. And then take an action. And the action I can take here are different types of actions. So in this particular case, I'm actually going to call Maximo and create a service request based on that condition being exceeded. So just to real quick demonstrate this, I'm going to go back into my Pi system. I'm going to go into my, this allows me to manually manipulate the data readings here. So, but let's pretend this is actually done through the actual vibration spiking. So I'll set the vibration to 0.25 and refresh this. 0.25 should have exceeded the limit that is done on the Watson side, the limit that we set there. If I now go back to my boards and look at my device information, and you can see now what has happened on the IoT platform side is that, about 20 seconds ago, it created this high pump vibration alert on the Watson IoT side. And then and the other thing that has happened here is if I now go back to on the Maximo side and look at my asset 7, and wait for this to refresh. There we go. If I now click on work, what we should be seeing right now is the Watson IoT service request that was just generated based on that event. And if I click on that, that will bring me right into Maximo itself. And you can see that the details of that event are that it was reported by Maximo Health Insights, and of course what is shown as the description and the long description. In this particular case, I put the actual the condition that was violated as part of the long description here. So, there's always little time to work with here. So, just to wrap this up and to open up the floor to some questions is one closing comment I'd like to make is there's a lot of material to absorb here, and you may or may not be interested in exploring more. Is one of the things that I recommend. If you're interested in this, is either contact me or whoever you're currently dealing with on the OnTrack side for a more in-depth demo. We can certainly talk to you if you currently have OSI Pi. Is what are the components you need depending on the age of your Pi installation. You may or may not have all the out-of-the-box components or not. Talk about how would you quantify and approach asset health as a general concept. Who do you need to talk to? Which people on your side of the fence do you need to include in that? And just in general, how to use the real-time data to establish asset health. The other thing I forgot to mention earlier here is that the demonstration I've just done for you that connects Pi to Maximo did not require any third-party components. So the only components you would need there are components you get with your OSI Pi install and the Maximo components. And with that, I guess I would like to, Brian, if you can help me with that, is open up the floor if there's any questions.